Hey guys, welcome to today's video where we're going to be discussing Washington's defense and what to expect from them in 2020. Before we get started, please like and subscribe. It really helps my channel grow. And on a quick side note, if you don't already know, I've been writing some articles for the updog.com, which is basically a sports article website where anyone under the age of 22 can post articles on any sports topic that they're interested in. If any of you are, interested in reading some of the articles on the website, feel free to go check those out. I'll leave a link to them in the description down below. There are some really interesting articles up, and we're coming out with new content daily. Secondly, if any of you are under the age of 22 and are interested in doing some sports writing, then you can sign up on the updog.com immediately. By the way, it's free and you can write as much or as little as you want. The only requirements are that you're under 22 and are interested in sports writing. If this is something that even partially interests you, why not give it a shot? It's a good thing to put on a resume, and once again, you can write as much or as little as you want. I'll leave the link in the description down below for those that are interested. Now let's dive right into the video, and I hope you enjoy. So before we get started on talking about the Washington defense in 2020, let's talk about what they did in 2019. They were 27th in yards allowed, 18th in passing yards allowed, 31st in rushing yards allowed, 27th in points allowed, and they were tied for 15th in takeaways. They had 45 plus sacks and 83 quarterback hurries last season, but they also allowed 35 passing touchdowns. What does that show? That shows that they had a really good front four, front seven, but their secondary struggled at times. The potential of this defense is also really high. It's almost off the charts. They've got so many former first-round picks like Chase Young, Montez Sweat, Ryan Kerrigan, and they're all going to be able to rush the quarterback and do damage. They've also got Daron Payne and Jonathan Allen, who are good at the defensive tackle position. Plus, this offseason, something that has been stressed and something that has really been made obvious that Washington's going to be able to do in 2020 is that Jack Del Rio has said that this team is going to be playing in a 4-3 base defense. Traditionally, Washington's played in a 3-4 base defense. At least that's what they did last year. And that meant that the pass rushers also had to drop back in coverage a lot, which is not strong suits of guys like Ryan Kerrigan or Montez Sweat. That's not things that they are good at dropping to coverage. Rather, in a 4-3 base defense, they're going to be able to rush the passer, get to the quarterback, and you'll see that sack total increase too. Playing in a 4-3 base defense will also mean that there will be two true defensive tackles on the field, and it will probably most likely be Jonathan Allen, and on passing situations, Matt Ioannidis, just because of his ability to get to the quarterback. But on running situations, it's probably going to be Daron Payne. So you may have just noticed that the lighting just changed and my shirt just changed. So while I was editing the video, I realized I forgot to say something. So moving to a 4-3 base defense is really going to help this run defense too. Jack Del Rio has made it clear and obvious that the run defense last year for Washington was a problem, and the new regime in Washington with Jack Del Rio and RIvera really want to emphasize stopping the run. That was a problem for Washington last year, and that's something that needs to be emphasized. Moving to a 4-3 base defense puts two true defensive tackles at the line of scrimmage, and of course that's going to help stop the run. If it's Daron Payne, who's a run-stuffing specialist, he's really good. As I said, he's going to be on the field for run-stopping situations. So with him and Jonathan Allen, or even Matt Ioannidis, having two defensive tackles at the point of attack is going to help stop the run, and we should be able to see this Washington defense be able to stop the run better in 2020. So now let's move on to Ryan Kerrigan. Kerrigan is a four-time Pro Bowler and has been with Washington since 2011. In 2019, it wasn't his finest season, but in 12 games, he had one pass deflection, one forced fumble, and 5.5 sacks. He had 25 combined tackles, and that is nowhere near what we're used to from Ryan Kerrigan. 2018 is more like a Ryan Kerrigan season that we've seen in the past. In 2018, he played in 16 games. He had 3 forced fumbles. He had 13 sacks. He had a fumble recovered, 43 combined tackles, and that's what Ryan Kerrigan is. If you saw the 5.5 sacks last year, that's actually the lowest of his entire career. And don't think that Ryan Kerrigan is falling off the map. Kerrigan is still one of the better pass rushers in the NFL, and playing him as an edge rusher instead of as an outside linebacker is really going to help him be able to get to the quarterback more often and quicker. And it's going to help his sack production increase too. Last season, Kerrigan earned one of the lowest PFF grades of his career at 63.1, but in 2018, which was obviously his better season, he earned a 75.9 PFF player grade. And I think a 72, 73 PFF player grade is probably what we should expect from Ryan Kerrigan next year. You're going to see the sack totals go up. You're going to see the productivity go up. And I think Kerrigan is one of the better players in the NFL. He's super underrated, and I think he's going to be one of the leaders of this Washington team going forward. Behind him, they've also got Montez Sweat, right? He was picked up in the first round last year, and in his first half of the season, he didn't play well. Couldn't get going. But in the second half of the season, he was lights out. In 16 games last year, he had 7 sacks, 50 combined tackles, 2 fumbles forced, and he really showed that he was a first-round pick, right? If you saw what he did in the first half of the season compared to the second half of the season, there was a big switch, and if he can play more like he did in the second half of the season, then this defense could be really scary. Now, though, let's move inside to Jonathan Allen. Jonathan Allen is one of the better defensive tackles on this team, and he's one of the better defensive tackles in the NFL. He's definitely an above-average player, and in 2019, 15 games, he had 6 sacks. That's really good. You can get to the quarterback. Anytime you can get pressure from the inside, you know your defensive line is going to be solid. In 2018, he had 8 sacks and 61 combined tackles, so he's a big sack guy, and his ability to get to the quarterback is really going to be needed for this Washington team. He had a 60.5 PFF player grade last year, but don't look too much into that. I don't love PFF as a grade for players and how they are, but overall it just gives a sense of where they're at. Nonetheless, Jonathan Allen, great defensive tackle, and I think he's going to be a really good player going forward. They've also got Daron Payne. Daron Payne is more of an established run stuffer than a big sack guy, but nonetheless, he can still get to the quarterback. And the truth is, anybody on this Washington defensive front can get to the quarterback. In 2019, he had 2 sacks, 2 pass deflections, and 56 combined tackles. But if you look in 2018, in 16 games, he had 5 sacks. So he can get sacks, but he's not as good as Matt Ioannidis at getting to sacks. But I'll get to Ioannidis in a second. In 2019, Payne earned a 67.4 PFF player grade. But nonetheless, Payne is still a really good defensive tackle. He's an above-average player, I think, in my mind. And he's a former first-round pick, so he's definitely got talent. Now, though, let's move on to Matt Ioannidis, who was a 5th-round selection in 2016. Ioannidis in 2019 played in 16 games for Washington. He had 8.5 sacks, 64 combined tackles, and he was lights out. He was excellent. As I said, he's probably a better pass rusher than Payne, and in certain pass rushing situations, maybe like 3rd and long, even 3rd downs in general, you're probably going to see Ioannidis on the field more than Payne. In 2018, he had 7.5 sacks. He's a big sack guy. 2017, 4.5 sacks. He's always increased his sack totals throughout his career, and that's a really good sign from the defensive tackle. He earned a 71.9 PFF player grade last year, and that is really good. But the guy I'm really excited to talk about is Chase Young. If you thought that the Washington team could get to the quarterback already, then insert Chase Young, and they can really get to the quarterback. At Ohio State last year, he had 21 tackles for loss. Just picture that, 21 tackles for loss, 16.5 sacks, and 46 total tackles. In 2018, he had 14.5 tackles for loss, 10.5 sacks. So he's a big sack guy. He gets into opponents' backfields. He stops running backs in their tracks. And overall, Chase Young, home run pick. Did they need Chase Young? No, but he was the best player available. And when you're a team that needs talent, Chase Young is the perfect player to add. He's probably going to be a starter immediately, but at the end of the day, there's going to be a rotation going. It's not going to be the same guys all the time. And just like at the defensive tackle position, right? If you look at the defensive tackles, Allen, Payne, and Ioannidis, they're all deserving of starting roles, but at the end of the day, none of them can really be starters because all 3 of them are good players, and you're never going to play 3 defensive tackles. Nonetheless, I mean, you're going to see a combination of Kerrigan, Sweat, Chase Young, all those guys, they're going to rotate amongst each other, and they're all going to be really solid players going forward. Now, though, let's move to the linebackers. Let's start with Thomas Davis. Thomas Davis brought in free agency. He was cut by LA. Obviously, he has links with Ron Rivera. He played under Ron Rivera in Carolina for many seasons, basically his entire career from 2005 to 2018. Last year was his only year not in Carolina. And Thomas Davis is, yes, he's a little bit older. He's now 37, but at the end of the day, he's a 3-time Pro Bowler, 1-time All-Pro member, and he's a really good football player. He's going to be a leader in this locker room. He knows how Ron Rivera wants to coach, and I think that Thomas Davis could be excellent. In 2019, that was not his finest season. He had a 61.7 PFF player grade, and he contributed in 16 games, had 1 sack, 112 tackles. 112 tackles is a good total. 1 sack isn't a great total, but he hasn't had that many sacks in his career. He's not a big sack guy. He had 2 pass deflections. I mean, it wasn't great. That's why the Chargers ended up deciding to move on from him. They cut him. But at the end of the day, if he can just add a playmaking presence and a link to Ron Rivera, I think this could be a really good move for Washington. They've also got Deon Hamilton. Deon Hamilton is a good linebacker in pass coverage. He had 1 sack last year, 49 combined tackles, and his PFF grade wasn't too bad. It was 74.9. That's pretty solid. He's an underrated player, and I think Deon Hamilton is actually really good. According to PFF, he posted an impressive 89.7 coverage grade last season, which was 2nd among qualifying linebackers, and a 77.1 passer rating allowed, which ranks 6th. So you can really see that he's a really good pass coverage linebacker, and overall, good coverage linebackers are in premium in the NFL these days. Now, though, let's move on to Kevin Pierre-Louis, who they brought in the offseason as a rotational linebacker for this Washington defense. Kevin Pierre-Louis, though, shouldn't be seen as a rotational linebacker. Yes, that's probably what he's going to be next season. In Chicago last year, he played in 14 games, didn't have a sack, had 37 combined tackles. But in those last few games of the season, he really showed that he could play. He earned a 90.5 PFF play rate. That's over 90. That's ridiculous. This guy goes under the radar. And I think that Kevin Pierre-Louis, that's a steal in free agency. They got him, and I think he's a really good player. And especially if he's a rotational player, he put up a 90.5 PFF player grade last year. And in 2018, I mean, he still had a good PFF grade. He had a 72.0 PFF player grade in 2018. So overall, Kevin Pierre-Louis as a third outside linebacker, maybe a fourth, second, who knows, a rotational outside linebacker is a really solid guy to have. In the middle of that defense, though, they got Jon Bostic. Bostic last season in 2019 played in 16 games, had an interception, had 2 pass deflections, 1 sack, 105 combined tackles. He's all over the place. And throughout his career, he's really showed that he can play in pretty much any defense. He's played in Indianapolis, he's played in Pittsburgh, he's played in Chicago. And overall, Bostic is a great player to have. Last season was, I believe, his first season with Washington. Yes, it was. And with Washington last year, he earned his 55.3 PFF player rate. Don't look too much into that. But overall, Bostic's a really good linebacker. And as one of the better players on this Washington defense, I think he's a good player to have in the linebacking corps. Now, though, let's move on to Reuben Foster. Reuben Foster, I don't know his health status as of yet. In 2 seasons with San Francisco, he missed some time. He played in 10 games his first season, played in only 6 games in his second season. But overall, he missed basically all of last season. And right now he's injured with a knee injury. So we don't know if he's going to be able to play for the season opener. However, they do have Cole Holcomb behind him. And he's a player that Washington really, really likes. They're super high on him. He had 1 sack last year in 16 games, but look at his tackle numbers. 105 combined tackles, 74 solo, 31 assisted. He had 2 quarterback hits and 6 tackles for loss. Overall, Holcomb is a really solid player. He earned a 56.0 PFF player grade. Don't look too much into that. That's not really his game. But overall, Holcomb, I think, could be a really good player going forward. And especially as a young player, he's going to continue to grow. He was a 5th-round pick in 2019. And in the second season in the NFL, I think he can only get better under Jack Del Rio and Ron Rivera. They've also got Ryan Anderson, who traditionally in a 3-4 defensive look was one of those outside linebackers that rushed the quarterback. Now that Jack Del Rio has made clear that they're moving to a 4-3 defensive look, Ryan Anderson, you're going to see a lot less of him going forward. Nonetheless, as a rotational linebacker, as a guy who can rush the quarterback at times, he's a solid guy to have. In 2019, he had 4 sacks, 44 combined tackles, and overall, he's not a great player, but he's not a terrible player. It's a former 2nd-round pick back in 2017, and he earned a 58.2 PFF player grade. In my mind, moving on from Ryan Anderson in the future could be something that Washington may look into because I don't think he's a great player, and I think he's not a guy that they really need. I mean, they've got a lot of pass rushers up front, and I don't think Anderson is an elite pass rusher. I don't think he's even a great pass rusher. He's pretty much your average pass rusher, and I don't think he's a great contributor to this team. Nonetheless, as a 3rd, maybe 2nd linebacker, a guy who can rush the passer at times, you're going to see a lot less of him going forward. Nonetheless, he's a solid player to have, but I just don't love him in this defense. Now, though, let's move into the secondary. This secondary is completely revamped. This offseason, they lost Quinn Dunbar and Josh Norman. They traded Quinn Dunbar to Seattle, who was one of the better defensive players on this Washington team. Not only was he a better defensive player on this team, but overall, he was one of the better corners in the league. I mean, last year, he played really well. And although there was an incident with him this offseason, he's still one of the better players that was on this Washington team, and he's going to be a loss going forward. With Josh Norman, he was passed. He just wasn't playing as good as Washington wanted to play, and they decided to cut him. He's now in the Bills, and he does leave a hole. I mean, Norman was a good player at times, but yes, he was past it. He wasn't playing like he had played earlier in his career. Nonetheless, they brought in Kendall Fuller. You might recognize that name because he's played with Washington before. In 2016 and 2017, he was part of Washington, and overall, he's a solid player. He's a former Super Bowl champion, obviously won with the Kansas City Chiefs last year, and last year he had 1 sack, 49 combined tackles, 2 pass deflections in 11 games. Is he shut down? No. I don't think he's Quentin Dunbar level, but as a first corner, he's an experienced player, and he's proved in the NFL in the past that he's a good player. He earned a 61.4 PFF player grade last year, which isn't great, but in 2018, where he played in 15 games and had 2 interceptions, he earned a PFF grade of 71.7. So that's a little bit more of what Kendall Fuller can do. They also have Fabian Moreau. Fabian Moreau was a 3rd-round pick back in 2017, and last year in Washington, he played in 12 games, Started 7 of those games, had 3 interceptions, 44 combined tackles, and throughout his career, he hasn't been a big interception guy. In his 3 NFL seasons, last year was his most interception total, and he had a 52.7 PFF grade last season. Not great, I know, but in 2018, he had a 60.4 PFF player grade. As a second or even third corner on this team, he's a solid guy to have. Another guy that they brought in for agency was Ronald Darby. Ronald Darby, at this point in his career, is an NFL veteran, but I don't know if he still has it like he had early in his career. Last season was a little bit of a down year. He only played in 11 games, had 2 interceptions, and he had 37 combined tackles. He has been injured for the better part of 3 years. I mean, he only played in 11 games last year. He only played 9 the year before, and he only played in 8 the year before that. But if he can stay healthy, he is a solid corner. I mean, is he locked down, shut down? I don't think so. But, I mean, here in the 44.8 PFF player grade. But if we look back at 2016, where he played most of the season, you're in the 68.3 PFF player grade. I don't think Darby is completely lost at this point, but he's still a good player. He's still a good corner. I don't think he's shut down. But overall, I think for Jack Del Rio and Ron Rivera, he's a solid guy to have. Now, though, let's move on to Jimmy Moreland. Jimmy Moreland picked up in the 7th round back in 2019. Showed that, he shined at times a little bit last year. It wasn't great. Wasn't bad. In 14 games, he only started 5 games. He had 42 combined tackles, 4 pass deflections. Overall, he wasn't terrific, but nonetheless, for a 7th round pick, he was pretty solid. I mean, you're in a 56.7 PFF player grade last season. That's not great. But nonetheless, going into second NFL season going forward, I think Moreland has potential. As a 4th corner on this team, I think he's a good guy to have. And overall, in the 7th round back in 2019, I think he was a good player to select. I mean, if he can be even a contributor in the 7th round, that's a good pick. Now, though, let's move to the safeties. Let's start with Landon Collins, the strong safety. Collins is a 3-time Pro Bowler and 1-time All-Pro member. Collins, originally of the Giants, was brought in 2019 on a big free agent deal. In Washington last season, played in 15 games, had 4 pass deflections, 2 fumbles forced, 1 sack, 117 combined tackles, and overall, that's not exactly how he's played in the past in New York, but overall, he still had a solid season with Washington. He's a good safety, and he had a 69.3 PFF player grade last year. In 2018, though, he had a 70.9 PFF player grade, and in 2017, he had 82.3 PFF player grade. So over the past few seasons, he has declined. But overall, if Collins is able to get back to how he played in New York, then they have a really good safety. I mean, Collins, he's a hard hitter. He's able to stop the run. He's good in pass protection. And overall, I think Collins, he's one of the better safeties in the NFL, and he should be treated as one of the better safeties in the NFL. But last year, he didn't play like one of the better safeties in the NFL. He's on a big contract, and he's going to need to earn that money. So overall, I think if Collins can improve going forward, then they've got a solid safety back there. But if Collins plays more like he did in 2019, or even worse than he did in 2019, then that contract is going to look very ugly very quickly. But now, though, let's move on to Sean Davis. Sean Davis last year played for Pittsburgh. They brought him over. He only played in 1 game, was injured for most of the year, but in 2018, he played in 15 games. In 15 games in 2018, he had 7 pass deflections and 80 combined tackles. And that season, his PFF grade was a 69.7. Davis, he's been in Pittsburgh for 4 years, was a 2nd-round pick in 2016. He's not a great safety, but nonetheless, he's a solid guy to have. He's an average, maybe below average player. But with him and Collins as safeties, I think the safety room is good. Overall, this defensive back room, I don't think it improved this offseason. I mean, Kendall Fuller, I don't think is better than Quinton Dunbar, and I don't think Ronald Darby is that much better than Josh Norman, or at least he didn't play that much better than Josh Norman did last season. But overall, if Fuller can get better next season, he can get back to how he played earlier in his career, and if Ronald Darby can stay on the field, then maybe the secondary can be good. Last year, the secondary was the problem for this team. Obviously, the front 7 was good, and I think the front 7, especially the front 4, are going to be really good. I think this front 4 is elite. I think this pass rush is elite. I mean, just look at the players they have. They have Ryan Kerrigan, Chase Young, Jonathan Allen. All those guys are going to be good. And not to mention, Ron Rivera has a great coaching record. Plus, I don't think I talked about it earlier, but if you look at Jack Del Rio's ability as a coach, too, as a defensive coordinator, they've got one of the better defensive coordinators in the league. He's been a great defensive coordinator in the NFL before. He's coached top 5 defenses. Obviously, he was a head coach in Jacksonville, but he was a defensive coordinator with Denver when they made it to the Super Bowl. I mean, overall, Jack Del Rio has a great track record, and he's one of the better defensive coordinators in the NFL. He's a guy that can really turn around this Washington defense. Last year, they were great at getting to the quarterback, but this year, I think they can get even better getting to the quarterback. I mean, they're going to be able to put more guys up front, more guys that can really get to the quarterback, and overall, that's a really good sign for this Washington team. And I think Jack Del Rio really understands what this Washington team needs. Going forward, though, I think this defense is going to be the strong suit. They've got so much potential on this defense that on offense they don't really have. Yes, they have Dwayne Haskins on offense, but overall, I don't love that offense. Yes, if that offense can maybe score some points and Dwayne Haskins can improve in his second year, then honestly, it's not a long shot. But I think this Washington team does have a shot at the wild card. I mean, they're in a really, really easy division. I mean, one of the easier divisions in the NFC. I mean, Dallas has struggled in recent years, and Philadelphia just for some reason can't stay healthy. Plus, there's a lot of uncertainty about COVID, and a lot of guys could end up dropping out. At the date of recording, no one has opted out of the team. That could change, so watch out for that. But as this thing stands now, I think this Washington team and Washington defense especially is going to be really good in 2020. They're going to improve, and I think next season they have potential to be a top 10 defense. But overall, I think they're going to be a top 15 defense next year, and they've got a lot of young talent and a lot of potential, and I think this Washington defense is going to be really exciting to watch. So watch out, Washington fans, and get excited to watch this Washington defense hopefully dominate in 2020.
Now that you've reached the end of my video, I want to thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe as it helps my channel out, and check out my other videos on my channel. Also, you can follow my Instagram, the link is in the description down below, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Until next time, see ya.